Good morning, and thank you for joining me. As leader of the Green Party of Canada and as member of Parliament, there are a lot of questions that I think Canadians should be able to examine and have out on the table in relation to Canada's growing relationship with China. Before I plunge into the list of concerns that I have, I need to say something that contextualizes this issue. It would be wrong to sound anti-Chinese. That would be absurd. China's the growing superpower on this planet. There's no question about it. Relations with China are critical for any country. I saw China at the recent COP17 in Durban be more flexible and more progressive, believe it or not, than our own government. I saw China actually say that it was prepared to take on binding targets as long as Kyoto Protocol was renewed, where our government was trying to derail that process. So a relation with China that starts by saying we don't like you buying our oil is certainly the wrong place to start. And that's not what this is about. So I wanted to set that contextual message. I'm very mindful of what the Dalai Lama exhorted Canadians when he was visiting Canada a number of years ago, before I was involved in politics and was working with the Canada-Tibet Committee. And he said, you know, we can't make it us and them. Even in a situation as critical as human rights in Tibet, the Dalai Lama urged that we realize that we're all the same, that we have to find ways to work together, but that human rights can't be ignored. Still, he did not want us to become in any way against the Chinese government. It would be absurd. But there are problems, and there are significant problems, and they are now impinging on not only our energy security, but our foreign policy, our attitude towards human rights, and so many different aspects of the current controversies over expansion of the oil sands and the Enbridge-China pipeline with risky tanker traffic to Asia, that I think these questions need to be out on the table, and they need to be out on the table in a way that's transparent. What's not been transparent to Canadians is that between 2007 and 2011, 16%, which is a big chunk of new oil sands acquisitions and investments, came from Chinese state-owned enterprises. We've not been looking at all in our daily press, or certainly not in the House of Commons, in the reality that Sinopec, in buying the 9% stake that was ConocoPhillips' share of Syncrude, with that buy also got veto over whether Syncrude could export its crude, or, which I think most Canadians would prefer, refine it here in Canada to create jobs here. That decision has been taken out of the hands of Canadian policymakers, and now it can be exerted through a veto by Sinopec, a Chinese state-owned enterprise. We're seeing not only the investment take place in expansion of the oil sands, but a strong investment by China in the Enbridge supertanker scheme. So that when the Prime Minister has tried to position this issue as though we wanted to open up markets to China, presuming that we had something to sell to an offshore customer, that's actually mischaracterizing this new relationship. This is actually us becoming a colony of a new empire. And our rights and sovereignty to exercise over decisions made in Beijing are narrowing down to very few choices in a limited menu because of the existing levels of Chinese state oil control in the Athabasca region, and now, if it should be approved, the Enbridge-China pipeline and tanker scheme. Those are just some of the issues. Job security is a key one. With every pipeline built to ship crude bitumen offshore, we ship jobs offshore too. This is in direct contradiction to Stephen Harper's 2008 election campaign promise that we would not allow bitumen crude to be shipped to another country for refining if that country had lower environmental standards around refineries than Canada, which is clearly the case in the whole purpose, the rationale of the Enbridge-China pipeline tanker scheme is exactly that, to take crude bitumen from Canada, ship it to China, where it will be refined there. I'm not faulting the Chinese government. This is a strategy to improve the economic health of China. But the question is, where is our government acting in the interests of Canadians? We're looking at further connections that I can't in terms of the foreign policy considerations, it's almost impossible to identify all the ways in which this compromises our foreign policy. China and Russia together, for instance, vetoed the UN resolution to call for Assad to resign. What's China's interest there? Well, China's doing a lot of oil business with Assad and Syria. China is, Sinopec in particular, likely to be the source of oil to Iran if another group of nations try to put in place an embargo. How effective is Canada in being Israel's best friend when we are also very much beholden to Sinopec and to China on a whole range of foreign policy concerns? Ultimately, and this is something that I've found baffling, is why have we as Canadians seen this creep up on us without a public discussion? I recall so clearly my first visit to Calgary when friends of mine from law school took me to downtown Calgary and pointed out the Petro-Canada building and said, "We call this Red Square." It was their little joke at the fact, of course, that Pierre Trudeau had tried to nationalize Alberta's oil resources to, as we know, enormous public outcry. And what I find deeply ironic now is that we don't have Petro-Canada, we have Petro-China. The nationalization is being done by Beijing, not by Ottawa, and there's hardly a murmur. Now, those are some of the points that are outlined in the press release. I need to take some time to update it, because in the last 24 hours I've been investigating what Canada just signed with China in terms of a trade deal. The front page of our newspapers today proclaims, as though it's good news for Canadians, that the Prime Minister has landed an investment deal with China. So forgive me for taking a few seconds to tell you what a disaster this is if it goes through. Investor state provisions were first put into trade deals in NAFTA. It's Chapter 11 of NAFTA, and what it means is that a U.S., or in NAFTA's case, Mexican corporation, can sue the federal government, or a provincial government, or a municipal government, if their expectation of profits is reduced by an action at that level of government. So we have seen the repeal of measures passed by the Canadian Parliament to remove a toxic gasoline additive from our products in Canada. We've seen the repeal of legislation based on a U.S. corporation bringing a Chapter 11 NAFTA complaint against the Government of Canada, and we paid out tens of millions of dollars to such corporations in the last number of years. So picture this. Now we've got a situation where if this deal goes through, and it must be stopped in the Parliament of Canada, this deal will require a vote. The Prime Minister can't do this on his own, although there's much he can do unilaterally. This would allow Beijing Communist Party-controlled decision-making, that's fine, it's their investment, to sue Fort McMurray as a municipality if something passed in that town appeared to offend the Chinese expectation of profits. They could sue the province of Alberta if they decided to improve their water quality standards. They could sue the federal government of Canada if we decided to exert some energy sovereignty, job creation plans to make sure that our crude bitumen is processed in Canada and is not exported as fast as we can get it into pipelines. We would be vulnerable to multi-billion-dollar lawsuits by this good news, all flags flying. Prime Minister's big success in China is to hand us over hook, line, and sinker to another government. I'm afraid that this has gone too far. This requires debate in the House of Commons. This is about Canada's sovereignty as a nation to determine our energy future, our environmental future, our economic future, and to make decisions about whether we want jobs in Canada or jobs in China. Happy to take any questions you have. Je vais ajouter quelques mots en français. C'est les questions primordiales pour les Canadiens et les Canadiennes. Qu'est-ce que se passe avec les relations de commerce avec la Chine? Qu'est-ce qui se passe avec les grands achats, dont les sables bitumineux, par les corporations qui sont absolument les projets de le gouvernement de la Chine? Qu'est-ce qui se passe avec tout ce qui passe sans transparence, sans débat? On doit étudier le commerce avec la Chine, on doit décider pour nous-mêmes ce que c'est dans l'intérêt du Canada ou non. Merci.